On Wednesday, the Venezuelan indigenous parliamentary elections are underway in 10 states of the country. The World Health Organization warns confirmed COVID-19 cases worldwide continue to increase. Ghana's opposition leader on Tuesday warned President Nana Akufo-Addo against any attempt to steal his week's election. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. On Wednesday, the Venezuelan indigenous parliamentary elections are underway in 10 states of the country. Over 3,500 community spokespersons will elect the 3 deputies. Indigenous parliamentary elections are held on a different date than regular parliamentary elections because the latter are held according to their uses and customs. According to Article 125 of the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, indigenous peoples have the right to political participation. The state shall guarantee indigenous representation in the National Assembly and in the deliberative bodies of the federal and local entities with indigenous populations in accordance with the law. In addition, indigenous peoples shall elect 3 deputies in accordance with the provisions of the electoral law with respect for their traditions. And the Venezuelan President, Nicolás Maduro Moros, held a press conference with international media this Tuesday, during which he addressed the recent parliamentary elections. Maduro described the electoral participation of the Venezuelan people as historic effort in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and the escalation of the economic, financial and commercial warfare of the United States against the country. The president highlighted the victory of progressive forces, which guarantees the recovery of the parliament in a peaceful and democratic manner. In response to questions from the media, President Maduro stressed that Venezuela has very good relations with the United States as a country and as a society, but has been unable to establish a respectful relationship with the current president and government, noting that there was better dialogue under the Obama administration, before it decreed Venezuela as a threat to U.S. national security. Maduro also noted his willingness to work towards a dialogue between the 2 countries following the inauguration of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden in January.
We have achieved the goal to peacefully recover the National Assembly through the popular vote. Today, December 8, 2020, I can say that a new National Assembly has been born in Venezuela, by mandate of the Constitution and in full compliance with the country's legal system, and in the only way a National Assembly can be chosen for its subsequent mandates, through the vote of the people. The Venezuelan people chose a new National Assembly through their votes, in a legal, constitutional way, and following the legal framework, which will rule and govern our country for the next 5 years, from 2021 to 2026.
This Tuesday, Chile commemorated 10 years of the tragic fire that occurred in a Tower 5 of the San Miguel prison, where 81 inmates lost their lives. Relatives of the victim protested the day before, demanding justice before the incident and improvements. Social organizations, relatives of the victims, and even survivors held a solidarity lunch to remember the dead in San Miguel prison on December 8, 2010. They took advantage of the occasion to continue demanding improvements for life in the prisons. By that time, the prison had a capacity for 1,110 inmates, but exceeded its capacity in 800, many of them in pre-trial detention. After 10 years of hard penal battles, this past November 14, the families of the victims were compensated, and the responsibility of the state for the overcrowding of the prison and the lack of evacuation measures was established. In an attempt to evade justice, the director of the Salvadoran National Civil Police, PNC, Mauricio Rias-Achicas, resigned from his post as Deputy Minister of Security in the midst of a special plenary session in the Legislative Assembly that sought to prosecute him for the crimes of disobedience and breach of duty. In the legislative meeting, the deputies accused Arriaza girls of usurpations of functions and ideological falseness, hours before the director of the PNC had given the irrevocable resignation to his position as Vice Minister of Security to President Nayib Bukele. With this action, the government officials sought to evade the investigation for the crimes of disobedience and failure to comply with his duties by avoiding the order to bring to trial 2 ministers of the Bukele cabinet, investigated for fraudulent handling of the funds for the COVID-19 pandemic, among others. The former Vice Minister of Security now faces 3 new crime charges: cover-up, procedural fraud, and arbitrary acts, and will be judged in court of peace without having to abandon his functions as director of the PNC. Popular movements in Guatemala leads another day of protests against the government of Alejandro Giammattei. Indigenous and campesino organizations participated in new roadblocks connecting different regions in the west of the country. The demonstrators persist in their rejection of the public policies carried out by the government. They also denounced that under the mandate of Alejandro Giammattei, the most vulnerable sectors do not enjoy economic and social guarantees, as well as the right to housing, health, and education. In the midst of this situation, they consider the formation of a plurinational constituent assembly to be imperative and Giammattei's resignation from office. In Costa Rica, different voices have been raised against the negotiation that the government plans to resume with the International Monetary Fund. Among these organizations, the Women's Movement in Action stands out, denouncing that a credit for $1.75 billion was already negotiated with the International Monetary Fund without making the multi-sector consultation. 60 organizations from 9 sectors and the government activated themselves in 12 working groups to seek solutions to the different needs of the country. However, the credit was not consulted in any of these spaces. The organization reiterates that the pact that the government intends with the multilateral body puts the future of new generations in danger. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Confirmed COVID-19 cases worldwide continue to increase. The World Health Organization reports more than 68.7 million cases with more than 1.5 million fatalities. The United States by far remains the nation worst hit by the pandemic, with the world's most cases and deaths, making up for more than 22% of the global caseload. To date, the U.S. registers over 15.6 million COVID-19 cases and more than 293,000 deaths. India is the second hardest hit nation. Health authorities report more than 9.7 million COVID-19 infections and over 141,000 fatalities. India is followed by Brazil in terms of case numbers. However, the South American country has the second highest death toll in the world. Brazil registers so far more than 6.6 million COVID-19 cases and over 178,000 fatalities. International human rights and humanitarian aid organizations warn about the possibility that poor countries will not receive the COVID-19 vaccine. According to a report published by the humanitarian organization People's Alliance for Vaccine, the organization denounced that 9 out of 10 inhabitants of some 70 poor countries will not have access to the vaccine. The organization warned that the rich countries began to monopolize the vaccine against the infection, making it impossible for poor countries to buy it. Updated data show that developed countries, which represent only 14% of the world's population, have acquired 53% of all the most promising vaccines so far. German Chancellor Angela Merkel advocated tougher restrictions on public life and pleaded with her compatriots to cut down on socializing as the country reported its highest single-day death toll of the coronavirus pandemic on Wednesday.
We are in a decisive, perhaps the decisive phase of fighting the pandemic, and all historical experience teaches us that the second wave of a pandemic in particular is far more demanding than the first, and they also teach that such a second wave can be very painful. The figures are at much too high, and quite alarmingly, the number of people requiring intensive medical treatment and the number of people dying from the virus is growing. Today we have 20,815 cases, 3,500 more than a week ago, 4,257 occupied intensive care beds yesterday. Today's figure is not yet available, and 590 dead. And the conclusion is simply that the number of contacts is too high. The reduction in contacts is not sufficient.
Germany is gradually moving toward a tighter lockdown as new virus cases remain high despite a partial shutdown that started on November the 2nd. Restaurants, bars, leisure and sports facilities are currently closed, and hotels are closed to tourists, but schools and non-essential shops remain open. To this date, Germany registers more than 1.2 million cases and nearly over 20,000 deaths. Merkel has consistently advocated decisive action, but has often had to move more slowly because of the country's 16 state governments are responsible for imposing and lifting restrictions. Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said Wednesday that a profound and ambitious relationship between the EU and the UK is in the interest of everyone, but not at any cost.
And I will add that in the future relations between the EU and the UK, following the latest developments in the negotiations between Brussels and London and the continuing distances in positions on crucial issues, what is most important is definitely a level playing field. On that, the EU cannot concede a millimeter. It is a fundamental principle, equal conditions. No one can think they can take advantage of the single market without respecting all the consequences that this requires. It will be an absolutely unfair competition that we will never allow. The topic of fishing, which for our country is less interesting, is more an economic question rather than one of principles. The distances on crucial issues has made it necessary to make another attempt in a meeting in Brussels between the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. A profound and ambitious relationship between the EU and the United Kingdom remains in the interest of everyone, but as we have always said, not at any cost.
Leaders of Britain and the European Union will meet Wednesday for a dinner that could pave the way to a post-Brexit trade deal or tip the two sides toward a chaotic economic rupture at the end of the month. Early morning comments from both sides insisting that it was for the other to compromise only highlighted the difficult task ahead of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Within just a few hours, they will meet to unstick negotiations that are deadlocked on key aspects of the future relationship. And United Kingdom regulators have had 2 reports of allergic reactions from people who took part in the first day of Britain's mass coronavirus vaccination program against COVID-19.
And as an illustration to this, I may share with the committees that even last evening we were looking at 2 case reports of allergic reactions. We know from the very extensive clinical trials that this wasn't a feature, but if we need to strengthen our advice, now that we've had this experience in the vulnerable populations, the groups who've been selected as a priority, we get that advice to the field immediately. And as a
Dr. June Rain reported those reactions as she testified Wednesday to a parliamentary committee. The UK began vaccinating elderly people and medical workers with a vaccine developed by US drug maker Pfizer and Germany's BioNTech on Tuesday. Professor Chris Whitty said the UK's vaccine task force is awaiting more information on whether the vaccine provides long-term protection from the coronavirus. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Ghana's opposition leader on Tuesday warned President Nana Akufo-Addo against any attempt to steal this week's election, as both sides claimed they were winning ahead of official results of the vote, largely deemed free and fair by observers. The strong statement by the opposition candidate John Mahama raised the temperature after Monday's presidential and parliamentary polls in a country known for stability in a troubled region.
Some of what is happening is unacceptable. And Nana Akufo-Addo continues to show credentials that are very undemocratic. You cannot use the military to try and overturn some of the results in constituencies that we have won. And so we will resist any attempt to subvert the sovereign will of the Ghanaian people.
And the United Nations organization warns of rising political tensions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the last month, leaders of the UN Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo met with members of civil society to discuss tensions in the government coalition and the presidential threat to dissolve the parliament. The representatives of the United Nations point out that this situation threatens national security and the functioning of the economy. In this sense, the multilateral organization called on the people and political actors of that African country to resolve their differences peacefully as soon as possible. United Nations organizations warns of rising political tensions in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yes, some of the UN staffs were actually detained and some were shot at. Why that happened? So this country is not no man's land. It has a government. It only has difficulty in the north. So they were told in some of areas they were not supposed to move. But they indulged themselves to in kind of adventurous expedition. They broke 2 checkpoints to drive hastily to areas where they were not supposed to go, that they were told not to go. So they were left alone when they broke 2 checkpoints, and then when they were about to break the 3rd one, they were shot at and detained. Now, of course, they are free.
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said Wednesday that U.S. sanctions are making it difficult for Iran to purchase medicine and health supplies from abroad, including COVID-19 vaccines.
Our people should know that whatever we want to do, when we want to import medicine or import equipment or vaccines, we have to curse Trump 100 times, as he has created so many problems and annoyances. A simple job that would normally be done with a phone call, a message, or a SWIFT transaction takes weeks or months to complete, and the whole country has to work together to transfer money from one place to the other just to buy medicine. The bunch spending their last days of their sinister tenure at the White House are the wicked.
On Wednesday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan blamed an incident at the Champions League game in which players walked off the pitch on France's racist stance and racist discourse.
The incident that occurred during the 13th or 14th minute, I think, of the Paris Saint-Germain game in France is really a new expression of France's recent especially racist stance and racist discourse. This approach is unpardonable. Başakşehir really displayed a determined stance, and they left the pitch, And then, despite the Romanian official being removed, they resisted and said this isn't enough for us. And after that, the Union of European Football Association made the decision to change all 4 officials, and they agreed to continue the game tonight under those circumstances.
Syria and Iran ratified their agreements on political, economic and military cooperation, which they consider vital to overcome the common challenges that both nations face. Hisham Wanus brings us more information.
Damascus and Tehran stressed the need to reinforce and strengthen their bilateral cooperation as well as with the other countries of the region during the visit of the newly appointed Syrian Foreign Affairs Minister to Iran. Both nations agreed on continuing the fight against the terrorists and the Zionist occupiers together until the liberation of all the occupied territories.
There are people who want to push Damascus away from Tehran, create a rupture of the resistant axis and prevent Syria from recovering its significant role at the regional level, as the United States has planned. However, this visit shows that Syria will not change its position, will not abandon its allies, and will stand firm on the resistance axis.
The Iranian officials with whom the Syrian Foreign Affairs Minister al-Maghdad met confirmed that Iran will be a key ally for Syria in the post-war era, just as it has been in the fight against terrorism.
Without doubt, Iran will not abandon Syria, and the Syrians are grateful for this position, which they trust will help to lift the blockade and put an end to their suffering. And they believe that the visit of the Syrian Foreign Affairs Minister to Tehran is a way to boost bilateral economic cooperation for the benefit of the people of both nations.
Iran will also be involved in the humanitarian help, sending thousands of tons of humanitarian aid to the Syrian people and to the Palestinians living in Syria. Tehran has said it will maintain this assistance until its Arab ally achieves total victory in the crisis that has affected it since 2011, expels the foreign invading forces, and restores peace, security, and stability.
Hisham Wanus, TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please follow us in social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.